federal government's role is in regulation and funding of abortion, gay marriage, and medical marijuana?
This is something that, these controversial issues that the federal government honestly should not have a role in funding, right? The government should not be funding abortions. It's a controversial issue. People out there, 50% of the country is pro-life, 50% is pro-choice. We shouldn't be spending taxpayer money on something so controversial. The same with medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is something that, first off, is a state's issue. And secondly, the government shouldn't be involved with funding. And the third thing you said is gay marriage, which to me, that's a state issue. Again, it's not something that the federal government, one way or the other, should be getting involved with. It's something that each state is allowed to make their own marriage laws, and that's exactly what should happen.
What do you believe the federal government's role is regarding the Second Amendment?
I think the Second Amendment is what it says, which is every American has the right to bear arms. And so the federal government's role in that is to make sure that the Constitution is withheld and that every American has that right. It's very, very basic.
So then they should intervene with, like, Washington, D.C. and other jurisdictions that try to limit or...
It depends on what, if something's clearly unconstitutional, if there were a ban on owning a gun, that is clearly unconstitutional, and the government would have to step in, the federal government would have to step in and say, this is an unconstitutional law, it is null and void. Bring it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has nullified tons of state laws that are unconstitutional. We fought a civil war over states' rights versus the right of the federal government to enforce the Constitution. And so if a state is overstepping their boundaries on that and denying people the right to bear arms, then absolutely the federal government has a right to come in and enforce the Constitution.
I could just follow up, Dan. On Project Vote Smart, you had a very low rating from the NRA. Are you aware of that?
Yes, and I actually don't understand it at all, because I've only had one vote up there, and it was a vote that said if you lose your firearm and you don't report it to the police within 3 days, you're guilty of a misdemeanor. And I voted against that. I said, that's ridiculous. How do you know, if you lost your firearm, how do you know you lost it? And all of a sudden, you're the criminal. And so I absolutely oppose that. I'm not sure, that's the only vote I've ever had to take up there on gun issues, so I'm not quite sure why the NRA, they gave me a C or something like that.
A D.
A D, yeah.
I found the same thing. I was researching that part. I found the one vote, so you might want to contact them.
And it's because the year before they had given me a B+, and it went to a D, and I'm like, geez, I only had one vote. That's surprising.
Okay. Next, Linda.
Number 11. What are your thoughts regarding the Patriot Act?
You know what? It's a very broad question, right? But I think that in general, we need to make sure that we are taking the steps necessary to catch terrorists without violating civil liberties. And so if you actually look at elements of the Patriot Act, which actually enable greater surveillance of suspected terrorists, that actually say, Patriot Act has enabled things like the no-fly list, right, which obviously was very, very recently in the news. Those are good and necessary steps. The thing that we always have to make sure with anything like the Patriot Act is we're balancing that with fundamental civil liberties to make sure that they are not exposed. And this is something that, I believe there actually is a difference between American citizens and foreigners who are in America. American citizens are basically, we need to make sure that their civil liberties are sacrosanct. They're citizens under the Constitution. People who are visiting this country are visiting this country. And we need to have greater surveillance on them because there's been something that has triggered suspicion, right? Most recently, in this attempted Christmas Eve bombing, the father of the perpetrator had come and said, I think my son's up to something. That should trigger something that this guy who's a visitor in the U.S., he should have been denied his visa. And if he is here, he's already here because of his visa, we should have surveillance on him. And that's what the Patriot Act enables. So it is a balancing act at the end of the day, but in general, I've been supportive of that.
I'd like to follow up on that. You called the person in Detroit a perpetrator. Do you really believe he's a perpetrator? Do you believe what Obama has done is correct?
Well, I don't know when you say what Obama has done, could you just clarify?
Obama has treated him as someone who broke the law as an American citizen.
Oh, okay.
This person came in from overseas,
Right.
committed a terrorist act, should have been put in the military.
I mean, it's an attack on America, right? I use the word perpetrator rather loosely, but let's be very clear, and that's what I was trying to draw before, is the difference between an American citizen and an attack on America, right, is that this was very clearly an attack on America. Al-Qaeda basically came out and said, hey, we encouraged this, we had a hand in this. You know, this is not something that should be treated, oh, this is just like any other murder. This was an attack on the United States.
We do have a war on terror, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you believe the states have a right to nullify federal laws?
No, I don't. As I actually think that that was very, very clear through the Civil War, that we actually fought a big war about that, and basically have, John Calhoun had tried to nullify acts back in the 1830s, and it was quite clear then and quite clear now that the federal government does reign supreme when it comes to issues of federalism. Now, that being said, what we need to make sure is that the federal government is acting within its clear constitutional scope. And so if you say, geez, so the state of Connecticut doesn't like the federal income tax, so the state of Connecticut is going to vote to not pay the income tax, I don't think we have a right to do that. Now, if you said, well, geez, the state of Connecticut is strongly opposed to the health care bill, right, and the fact that the health care bill is clearly unconstitutional and stepping beyond its bounds, well, then what our responsibility is to send folks to Congress who are going to stop them. We're not going to say Connecticut's going to secede from the Union or Connecticut's not going to follow the laws of the United States because we don't agree with them. But we need to make sure that our representatives who are not following the Constitution, which we have right now, are voted out of office.